When will you stop running from me?
You have to stop doing this.
I can't, you know that.
You must. Few words for you, Alpha. Let the sons of the royals relate with the royals and leave slaves to be together.
In the kingdom of Lysara, beauty was never merely admired. It was worshipped, measured, traded like gold. A flawless cheekbone could secure a marriage alliance. A cascade of silken hair might sway a council vote. The palace mirrors were polished daily, not for vanity alone, but because every reflection was a verdict. Yet above the glittering court, untouched by its fever, stood King Kaelion, alpha of the ancient wolf-blooded line. He was not handsome in the soft, courtly way the minstrels sang of, but his beauty looks tough. His features were carved too sharply. High cheekbones, a jaw like forged iron, eyes the color of sunlit amber that seemed always to look past people rather than at them. His black hair fell in unruly waves to his shoulders, and when the wind caught it during hunts, it reminded older courtiers of his father, the late king who had died with a spear through his chest and a roar still on his lips. Kaelion had inherited the roar, the strength, the crown. What he had not inherited was any appetite for the adoration that came with it. Noble daughters practiced their smiles in secret, tilting heads just so, hoping one glance might spark something in that steady gaze. Foreign princesses crossed mountains and seas, arriving in gowns heavy with embroidery and perfume that clung like mist. They curtsied low. They spoke of peace treaties sealed with rings. He thanked them politely, voice low and even, then turned away. Nothing stirred in him. No heat, no pull. The palace whispered it in shadowed corners. The alpha cannot love. His heart is forged of stone and moonlight, beautiful, but untouchable. Kaelion heard the whispers. He did not deny them. How could he explain what he did not understand himself? He was not cold by choice. He simply waited for something he could not name. A scent on the wind, perhaps. A voice in the dark. A recognition his wolf would know before his human mind caught up. So he walked the palace alone each evening as the sun bled out, letting the corridors swallow the echoes of the day's endless petitions and flattery. The path always took him past the eastern wing, where a narrow gravel lane branched off toward the slaves' quarters, low stone buildings half hidden by ivy and ancient oaks. And every evening, without fail, she appeared. Arin. She never walked. She hurried. Head down, the widest, oldest cloak in the quarter pulled tight around her slight frame, hood shadowing her face even in the dying light. The moment her eyes, those same hazel eyes he remembered from childhood, lifted and found his across the distance, she turned and fled. Silent footsteps on stone. A flash of gray fabric disappearing around the corner like smoke. He never called after her, never quickened his pace. He only let the corner of his mouth lift in the smallest, saddest curve. A smile no one else ever saw, and continued walking. Inside his chest, though, something twisted, sharp, familiar. The same twist he had felt at 12 years old when she first laughed at one of his clumsy attempts to skip a stone farther than hers. The same twist when she had pressed a crown of river reeds onto his head and declared him king of the willows. Her dimple flashing like a secret only he was allowed to know. Chapter 1. 14 years had passed since those afternoons by the water. 14 years since everything changed. He could still see it clearly. The riverbank soft with moss, sunlight splintering through willow leaves, her dark hair loose and tangled with bits of leaf and laughter. She had been 10, small but fearless, running barefoot over stones that would have cut anyone else's feet. Her mother dressed her in whatever scraps could be made pretty. Simple linen dyed soft blue, ribbons the queen herself had slipped into her hands. Queen Isolde had loved Arin the way she loved no one else after her own daughter was stillborn years before Kaelion. She called the slave child Little Star, braided flowers into her hair, gifted her tiny silver bells that chimed when she moved. Arin's own mother never objected. She would watch from the herb garden, smiling quietly. She carries light, she used to say. Let her shine where she can. Kaelion had believed they would always be that way, two children against the world, promising impossible things under the willow. When I'm alpha, he told her once, chest puffed with 12-year-old certainty, You'll be my queen. We'll rule together. No one will tell us what to do." She had laughed, dimple deepening. "And I'll make you wear flower crowns every day, even in council." They had sealed it with pinky swears and river water kisses on cheeks. But children grow and the world grows teeth. Started slowly. Arin began to hide when he came looking. She stopped waiting at the river. When he found her anyway, she looked at the ground, mumbled excuses, slipped away. He asked why until his voice cracked with frustration. She gave no answers, only distance. Then his father fell in battle. The kingdom draped itself in black. Mourning horns echoed for days. Arin did not come to offer comfort. She vanished deeper into the quarter. 2 years later, Queen Isolde followed. Fever took her in the night, swift and merciless. Kaelion was 18, suddenly king. Suddenly alone in a throne room too large for one grieving boy. He searched for Arin then, desperate for the one person who had ever seen him without the crown. She ran farther. The last time he cornered her, truly cornered her. In the herb garden at dusk, she had looked up at him with eyes that held no warmth. "The sons of royals should roll with royals," she said, voice flat. "Leave the daughters of slaves to roll together." He had stared, stunned into silence. "What changed?" he finally managed. We were best friends." "That was then, Kaelion." She turned away. "We were children." The words had cut deeper than any blade his father's enemies ever wielded. After that, he stopped chasing. He let the silence grow between them until it felt like a living thing, breathing, watching, waiting for one of them to break it. Yet every evening, when she ran, he still felt it. That old, stubborn ache. The wolf inside him stirred, restless, as though it remembered a scent long faded but never truly lost. That particular evening the sky was the color of bruised plums. He walked the corridor slower than usual, boots echoing softly. When he rounded the corner to the eastern path, there she was, cloak billowing as she hurried toward the quarter. Their eyes met. She froze for half a heartbeat, longer than usual. Then she ran. He watched her go, the familiar twist in his chest sharper tonight. Something felt different, closer to breaking. He reached his chambers, fire already lit, shadows dancing on tapestries of old hunts and victories. Thorn, his personal guard since boyhood, stood waiting. "Thorn," Kaelion said quietly. "Bring Arin to me." Thorn bowed. "At once, my lord." Minutes passed. Too few. Thorn returned alone, expression carefully neutral. "She refuses, sire," she said. "You shouldn't bother coming yourself." Kaelion's hand tightened on the back of his chair until the wood creaked. He remembered the last time he had gone in person, 2 years ago, after yet another refusal. She had stood in the garden doorway, arms crossed, veil already in place even then. "Do you remember?" he had asked, hating how young his voice sounded. "When we promised to rule together?" Her laugh had been small, bitter. "It's sad you still cling to children's games, Alpha. We were kids. Just kids." He had left without another word. Now he stared into the fire, flames reflecting in his eyes like distant stars. The ache had never left. It had only grown teeth of its own. Chapter 2. In the slaves' quarters, the air always smelled of damp stone, crushed herbs, and the faint, lingering smoke of last night's cooking fires. The buildings were low and huddled together like frightened animals, roofs sagging under years of rain and neglect. Lanterns hung from iron hooks outside each door, their weak yellow light barely pushing back the dark. Most nights the quarter was quiet, exhausted bodies sleeping on thin pallets, dreaming of lives they would never live. But Arin rarely slept deeply. Her dreams were full of hands reaching for her, wounds opening like red mouths, and her own skin stitching itself closed over someone else's pain. Tonight the quarter felt smaller than usual. She had run all the way from the eastern path, cloak flapping behind her like broken wings, heart hammering so hard it hurt her ribs. She slipped inside her tiny room, a narrow space barely wider than her outstretched arms, and bolted the door with trembling fingers. The bolt was old, rusted, but it still held. She leaned against the wood for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing through her mouth so she wouldn't make any sound. The cloak stayed on. Always, even here in the dark where no one could see. She moved to the small table by the single window, a cracked pane of glass patched with oiled parchment, and lit the stub of a candle with a flint. The flame flickered, throwing long shadows across the walls. On the table lay her few possessions. A chipped clay bowl, a bundle of dried lavender her mother had taught her to tie with twine, a small wooden comb worn smooth from years of use, and beneath it all, hidden in the shadow of the bowl, the only mirror she owned. A tiny, tarnished thing no bigger than her palm. She never looked into it anymore. Not really. Arin sank onto the edge of her pallet, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. The cloak's hood still shadowed her face. She let her head fall forward until her forehead rested on her knees. He had looked at her tonight the way he used to, quiet, patient, searching. Not angry, not demanding, just waiting. The same way he had waited by the river when she was late. Sitting on the flat rock with his chin in his hands, amber eyes lighting up the moment she appeared. She hated how much it still hurt. 14 years. She had counted every one. It began when she was 13, the summer after Queen Isolde gave her the silver bell necklace. Arin had worn it proudly, letting it chime against her collarbone, while she and Kaelion raced along the river path, laughing until they couldn't breathe. That was the summer the serpent birthmark on her cheek began to itch. At first she thought it was only the heat. Then the dreams started, vivid, feverish dreams of touching people and pulling their pain into herself like threads of black smoke. She woke with new marks on her arms, thin silver lines that hadn't been there before. Her mother noticed first. She turned Arin's arm in the lantern light, eyes widening. "Child, what have you done?" Arin hadn't known what to say. She only knew that when the stable boy cut his hand open on a scythe and she instinctively pressed her palm to the wound, the bleeding stopped. The gash closed, and a matching silver scar appeared on the inside of her wrist. Welcome to Ella's romance home. I hope you're enjoying yourself. Please don't leave without clicking on the like and subscribe button, and also drop your thoughts on the story. Now let's continue. Thin as a cat's whisker. Word spread slowly at first. A kitchen maid with a burn. A guard with a festering cut. They came to her in secret, whispering thanks, pressing small gifts into her hands. A ribbon, a sweet, a copper coin. She never asked for anything. She simply couldn't bear to watch someone suffer when she could stop it. But every healing left its price. The scars multiplied. Wrists, forearms, collarbones, the curve of her ribs. A long, jagged one across her left shoulder blade from the time she healed a hunter gored by a boar. Another curling around her throat like a second necklace, pale and shining, from closing the throat wound of a child who had fallen on a broken bottle. She began to cover herself. Long sleeves even in summer, high collars, and when the serpent birthmark seemed to grow darker, angrier, as though feeding on the pain she took, she started wearing a veil. Thin at first, then thicker. Eventually the wide cloak became her armor. Oversized, shapeless, the color of storm clouds so it blended into dusk when she ran. She ran because she was afraid he would see. Not just the scars, the truth beneath them. Because the more she healed, the more she understood. Her gift was no blessing. It was a chain. Every scar reminded her that she could save others, but never herself. And every time Kaelion looked at her with those patient eyes, she felt the old promise rise like a ghost between them. The promise of flower crowns and riverside vows, and she knew she could never stand beside him as queen. Not like this. Not marked and marred and carrying the pain of half the kingdom on her skin. Queens were flawless. Queens were light without shadow. She was shadow now. Beautiful once, perhaps, in the way children are beautiful, unscarred, unburdened. But that girl had died quietly, year by year, under the weight of kindness. Tonight had been worse. When their eyes met on the path, for one stupid heartbeat she had wanted to stop running. To walk toward him instead. To let the cloak fall and show him everything. The silver map of her sacrifices, the serpent birthmark that still curled like a question across her cheek, and see if he would still look at her the way he once had. But fear won. It always won. She had run. And now here she was, alone again, candle guttering low. A soft knock came at the door. Arin stiffened. Another knock. Gentle. Familiar. Arin. Thorn's voice. Muffled through the wood. The king asks for you. Her throat closed. She pressed her lips together until they hurt. Silence stretched. Then Thorn sighed. The sound of a man who had delivered this message too many times. He said to tell you, he won't come himself tonight, but he asked me to say he still remembers the river. And the reeds. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples spread through her chest. She did not answer. Footsteps retreated. The quarter fell quiet again. Arin reached up and touched the place where the silver bell necklace used to hang. The chain had broken years ago. She kept the bell in a small cloth pouch under her pallet. She pulled it out now, held it in her palm. The metal was cool, tarnished. But when she shook it gently, it still chimed soft, clear. The same note it had made when Queen Isolde fastened it around her neck and whispered, "For my little star." Tears came then. Hot, silent. They slid down her cheeks and soaked into the veil she still wore even in her own room. She did not sob. She had learned long ago how to cry without sound. But the ache, the old stubborn ache that matched the one she knew lived in Kaelion's chest, rose up and refused to be silenced. She curled tighter on the pallet, candle burning lower, shadows growing longer. Outside, the moon climbed higher, and somewhere in the palace, a king sat staring into a fire, waiting for an answer that might never come. Chapter 3. Morning came to Lysara the way it always did, slow, golden, reluctant to disturb the night's secrets. Sunlight slipped through the tall arched windows of the throne room like spilled honey, warming the marble floors and catching on the gold leaf that framed the ancient wolf banners hanging from the rafters. The air smelled of beeswax polish, fresh-cut lilies from the gardens, and the faint metallic tang of armor oil that clung to the guards stationed at every door. Kaelion had not slept. He sat on the throne now, not because he wanted to, but because the council would arrive soon and appearances mattered even when the heart felt hollow. His fingers rested lightly on the carved armrests, wolf heads with eyes of polished onyx, and he stared at the far wall where a tapestry depicted his great-grandfather's first shift under a blood moon. The threads had faded over generations. The wolf's fur looked almost silver now, like scars caught in moonlight. Thorn stood at his right shoulder, silent as stone. He had served since they were boys. He knew better than to ask if the king was well. Instead he said very quietly, "The council assembles in 10 minutes, sire. Lord Harrow and Lady Vera are already in the antechamber. And Lady Seraphine has requested a private word before the session begins." Kaelion's gaze shifted, slow, to the guard. Seraphine. Thorn inclined his head. She seemed insistent. A small muscle ticked in Kaelion's jaw. He had known Seraphine since they were children running through the same corridors he now walked alone. Daughter of Commander Volmir, the man who had carried his father's body home from the battlefield and placed it at the queen's feet without a word. Seraphine had grown into everything the kingdom expected of its future queen. Tall, elegant, skin like fresh cream, hair the color of autumn wheat braided with silver threads, eyes a clear gray that missed nothing. She moved with the certainty of someone who had never once doubted her place. And she had never once hidden how much she wanted his. He remembered her as a girl, always tugging at his sleeve, always suggesting games that conveniently left Arin out. When he chose the river over the palace lawns, her smile would tighten, just for a second, before smoothing back into perfect composure. He had never thought much of it then. Children were selfish. But children grow up, and Seraphine's selfishness had sharpened into something quieter, more dangerous. Ambition wrapped in silk. "Send her in," he said. The doors opened. Seraphine entered alone. She wore pale blue this morning, the color of a winter sky just before snow. The gown clung and flowed in equal measure, sleeves trailing like wings. A single sapphire hung at her throat, catching the light every time she breathed. She curtsied low, graceful as water over stone, then rose with eyes fixed on his. "My king," she said, voice soft but carrying. I hope I find you well. You may speak plainly, Seraphine. She stepped closer. Close enough that he caught the faint scent of jasmine and something sharper, like crushed myrrh. The kingdom watches you, Kaelion. They see a king without a queen. They whisper. They worry. Let them whisper. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. They will do more than whisper if you remain alone. Alliances fray. Borders grow restless. A queen would steady them. Steady you. He studied her. And you believe you are that queen. I have been beside you since we were children. I know your mind, your burdens. I would carry them with you. She paused, letting the words settle. I would never run from you. The last sentence landed like a thrown knife. Quiet, precise, aimed at the heart. Kaelion's expression did not change, but something in his eyes darkened. You overstep. I speak truth. She lifted her chin. Someone must. The girl in the slaves' quarters runs every time you appear. She hides her face. She refuses your summons. What future is there in chasing shadows? Enough. And need you know, the girl in the slaves' quarter has a name. Seraphine did not flinch. Instead she stepped even closer, until the hem of her gown brushed the lowest step of the dais. I do not say this to wound you. I say it because I care. Because I have always cared. Her voice dropped to something almost tender. Let me stand where she will not. Let me be the one who stays. For a long moment the throne room was silent except for the distant murmur of the assembling council beyond the doors. Kaelion rose slowly. He towered over her, but she did not step back. You speak of care, he said, voice low. But you speak of her with contempt. I speak of what is real. She is a slave's daughter. Hidden. She has chosen distance for years. I choose nearness. Every day. He looked down at her, really looked. At the perfect posture, the flawless skin, the eyes that held no secrets because they had never needed to hide any. And for the first time he felt something like pity. Not for her position, but for the hunger that lived behind her composure. I have never asked you to be anything other than what you are, Seraphine. Do not ask me to be less than what I am. Her breath caught, just a hitch barely audible. Before she could answer, the doors opened wider. The council filed in, grizzled Lord Harrow with his ledger of border reports, Lady Vera carrying scrolls of trade agreements, Commander Valmir, Seraphine's father. His face carved from granite, giving his daughter only the briefest glance. Seraphine curtsied again, deeper this time, and retreated to her place at the edge of the circle. But as she passed Kaelion, her fingers brushed the back of his hand. Light, deliberate, gone in an instant. He felt nothing. The session began. Kaelion listened, spoke when necessary, issued commands in the calm, measured tone that had earned him respect if not warmth. But his mind was elsewhere. Halfway through, when Lord Harrow was droning about patrol rotations, Kaelion's gaze drifted to the tall window that overlooked the eastern gardens. Beyond the hedges and fountains lay the path to the slaves' quarters. Somewhere there Arin would be working. Perhaps in the herb beds, hands deep in soil, veil tied tight, cloak heavy even in the growing heat. He pictured her fingers, long, careful, plucking leaves, crushing them between thumb and forefinger to release their scent. He pictured the way she used to hum while she worked, small tunes she made up on the spot. He pictured the dimple that appeared only when she was truly happy. And he pictured her hiding, but why? Not because he had seen them, he never had, but because he knew her, knew the shape of her kindness, knew she would bleed for anyone without hesitation. The thought settled in his chest like lead. When the council finally adjourned, Seraphine lingered. She approached again as the others filed out. Walk with me in the gardens? She asked. The roses are in bloom. He considered refusing, then nodded once. They walked in silence at first. The gravel paths crunched underfoot. Bees droned among the blooms. Sunlight dappled the leaves overhead. Seraphine spoke first. You still think of her? It was not a question. Kaelion did not answer. She stopped beneath an arbor heavy with white roses. I could make you forget her. Not with cruelty. With time. With steadiness. With love. He turned to face her fully. Love is not a bargain, Seraphine. Her eyes glistened. Anger, hurt, determination all at once. Then what is it? A memory of river reeds and children's promises? A ghost who runs every time you reach for her? He said nothing. She stepped closer. I will wait, Kaelion, but not forever. She turned and walked away, gown trailing like spilled moonlight. He remained under the arbor long after she was gone. The scent of roses was sweet, almost cloying, but all he could smell was river mud, willow leaves, and the faint chime of a silver bell that no longer hung around anyone's neck. Chapter 4. The days leading to the moon feast felt like a slow tightening of invisible threads. Lysara prepared the way kingdoms always do for sacred nights. When the full moon rose fat and silver over the ancient forests, when wolf blood sang louder in every vein, when old magic stirred just beneath the surface of polite society. Torches were dipped in pitch and lined along the great outer courtyard. Servants strung garlands of night-blooming jasmine and moonflower vines across the arches. Long tables groaned under platters of roasted venison glazed with honey, silver bowls of pale wine that tasted of frost and starlight, baskets of bread still warm from the ovens. Musicians tuned lutes and bone flutes in shadowed corners. The air carried the scent of wood smoke, crushed petals, and anticipation sharp enough to cut. In the palace, Seraphine moved through the preparations like a queen already crowned. She oversaw the placement of every candle, the angle of every banner, the exact shade of silver thread woven into her gown for the evening. Pale as moonlight itself, the fabric shimmered with tiny seed pearls that caught firelight and threw it back in soft sparks. She wore no heavy jewels tonight. Only the single sapphire at her throat and a thin silver circlet that rested low on her brow like a promise. But beneath the grace, something feverish burned. She had not slept well since the garden conversation. Kaelion's words echoed in her skull. Love is not a bargain. She had smiled through the sting, curtsied, retreated. But alone in her chambers she had paced until the carpets wore thin under her slippers. She was tired of waiting. She was tired of being the steady one, the perfect one, the one who stayed while another ran. So on the afternoon before the feast, while the palace buzzed and sunlight slanted golden through her windows, she drew the heavy drapes, lit a single black candle and unwrapped the mirror. The mirror of Valerian lay on her dressing table now, silver frame tarnished at the edges, glass dark as ink until light touched it. She had found it years ago among her mother's locked trunks, wrapped in silk the color of dried blood. Her mother had never spoken of it, but Seraphine had watched once, as a girl, when Lady Valmir stood before it whispering words that made the air taste of iron. Now Seraphine stood before it herself. She looked into the glass. It did not show her face, not the way ordinary mirrors did. It showed fear. She saw herself fading. Cheeks growing hollow, eyes dimming, the court turning away as though she had never existed. She saw Kaelion's back as he walked toward shadows, toward Arin. Always Arin. The mirror whispered, voice like wind through dry leaves. If you cannot be chosen, become irresistible. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. She had read the old grimoire hidden beneath the false bottom of the same trunk. Lunar rites, subtle bindings, nothing so crude as chains or curses, just a gentle nudge, a whisper in the blood. Wolf blood answered to moonlight. Kaelion's wolf answered strongest of all. She would not force him. She would only illuminate herself, make herself the only light he could see. She performed the ritual in secret that evening, just as dusk bruised the sky purple. In her chambers she drew a circle of salt and crushed moonstone on the floor. She stood at its center in her bare feet, gown discarded, wearing only a thin shift of white silk. The black candle burned between her palms. She spoke the words her mother had once murmured, soft, rhythmic, ancient syllables that tasted of silver on her tongue. When the moon cleared the horizon, she stepped outside onto her private balcony. Moonlight poured over her like cool water. She lifted her arms, palms up, and let it fill her. The enchantment wove itself into her skin, into her breath, into the pulse that beat wolf strong beneath her ribs. Not dark magic. Not quite. Just amplification. A spotlight on what was already there. She felt it settle warm, tingling, like standing too close to a fire. When she looked down at her hands, they seemed to glow faintly, as though lit from within. She smiled into the night. It was done. The moon feast began at moonrise. The great courtyard filled with the court. Nobles in silvers and blues, warriors in ceremonial leather etched with moon phases, servants moving like ghosts with trays of wine. Torches burned high. Music rose, lutes and harps weaving melodies that made the blood hum. Kaelion arrived last, as was custom. He wore black trimmed in silver, a simple circlet of iron and moonstone on his brow. His wolf prowled close beneath his skin tonight. The full moon always called it nearer. He moved through the crowd with the easy authority of someone who owned every inch of ground he walked on, nodding to lords, accepting toasts, feeling nothing, until Seraphine stepped into the silver pool at the center of the courtyard. She had waited for this moment. The moonlight caught her gown and set it ablaze, pearls flashing, silk rippling like liquid starlight. She lifted her chin, met his eyes across the distance, and something shifted. Kaelion stopped. The music seemed to fade. The chatter dimmed. His wolf lifted its head inside him, nostrils flaring. She was radiant. Not beautiful in the ordinary way. He had seen beauty before, dismissed it. This was different. This was moonlight made flesh. This was the pull of pack, of moon, of instinct older than memory. He crossed the courtyard without conscious thought. The court stilled, breath held. He offered his hand. She placed hers in it, cool fingers steady. They danced. The musicians struck up a slow, winding melody. He led her in wide circles, steps sure, bodies close enough that he could feel the heat of her through silk and leather. Her gray eyes never left his. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, he did not look away. The kingdom watched. Whispers began immediately, soft as moth wings. The future queen. Finally, she has won him. Seraphine felt it flood her chest. Relief so sharp it hurt. Triumph. Joy. She rested her cheek against his shoulder for one turn, breathing in the scent of pine and iron and wolf. He did not pull away. When the dance ended, he did not release her hand at once. He stood there, looking down at her as though seeing her for the first time. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled, small, perfect, victorious. "You are most welcome, my king." Across the courtyard, half hidden behind a pillar draped in jasmine, Arin watched. She had not meant to come. She had meant to stay in the quarter, to keep her head down, to let the night pass without her. But the music carried on the wind, and something, some old, foolish pull, had drawn her to the edge of the celebration. She saw him dance, saw the way he looked at Seraphine, saw the court smile and nod and whisper approval. Her hand rose instinctively to the veil that covered her face. Beneath it, the serpent birthmark burned as though freshly inked. She turned away before anyone could notice her. She walked back through the darkened gardens, cloak pulled tight, footsteps silent on grass wet with dew. When she reached her room, she closed the door softly. She did not cry this time. She simply sat on the edge of her pallet, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall. The silver bell lay beside her, dull in the candlelight. She picked it up, shook it once, chimed small, clear, lonely. Then she set it down again. And for the first time in 14 years, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had lost. Not just a friend, not just a promise, but the possibility of ever being seen. Really seen. She blew out the candle. Darkness folded around her like arms. Outside, the feast continued. Music rose, laughter rang, and in the courtyard, beneath a moon that cared for none of them, a king danced with a woman who had finally found a way to make him look. Chapter 5. The days after the moon feast passed in a soft, golden haze for most of the court. The kingdom exhaled. Whispers turned to open smiles and congratulations murmured behind gloved hands. The Alpha King had danced with Seraphine Valmir beneath the full moon, had held her hand longer than custom required, had looked at her as though she were the only star in a sky suddenly emptied of others. It felt like the natural conclusion to a story everyone had been waiting to hear end. Kaelion felt it too, or thought he did. He woke each morning with her image lingering behind his eyelids. The way moonlight had turned her hair to silver thread, the cool press of her fingers in his palm, the quiet certainty in her gray eyes. His wolf settled when she was near, curled contentedly instead of pacing. The restlessness that had gnawed at him for years, the one that always sharpened when he passed the eastern path, dulled to a distant hum. He told himself this was peace. He told himself this was what waiting had been for. He sought her out more often now. In the mornings he found her in the rose garden, where dew still clung to the petals and the air smelled clean and sharp. She would be there with a small pair of shears, clipping blooms for the breakfast table, humming softly under her breath. He would stand at the arched entrance and watch her for a moment before speaking. "Good morning, future queen," he said one such day, voice low. She turned, cheeks already flushed from the cool air, or perhaps from something else. "My king," she curtsied, then rose with a small smile. "The roses are stubborn this year. They only open for moonlight." He stepped closer. "They opened for you last night." Her laugh was light, practiced. "Flattery does not suit you, Kaelion. Truth does." She offered him a single white rose, thorns carefully removed. He took it, fingers brushing hers. The contact sent a pleasant warmth through him. Steady, uncomplicated. He tucked the bloom into the buttonhole of his tunic without thinking. They walked together after that. Along the gravel paths, past fountains that sang in low voices, past hedges clipped into the shapes of leaping wolves. She spoke of council matters, trade routes, border patrols, the need for stronger alliances with the southern holds. She spoke intelligently, precisely. He listened. He nodded. He even smiled once or twice, small and fleeting, but real. The court noticed. Seraphine noticed most of all. She began to stand closer during meetings. Her hand would rest lightly on the back of his chair when she leaned in to offer counsel. At dinners she sat to his right, always. She laughed at his dry remarks, touched his arm when she spoke, let her gaze linger just long enough to make others look away politely. And every night, when the palace quieted, she returned to her chambers and stood before the mirror of Arin. She did not need to look into it anymore to know what it showed. She fed it whispers of gratitude instead. Soft words of thanks for the warmth that now bloomed whenever Kaelion looked her way. She told herself it was not deception. It was clarity. She had only removed the obstacles. His stubborn memory of a girl who wanted nothing to do with him. His endless waiting for something that had never come. She was the something. She deserved this. Across the palace, in the slaves' quarters, Arin felt the shift the way one feels a storm approaching before the first drop falls. The other slaves spoke of it in hushed tones while they scrubbed pots or folded linens. The king and Lady Seraphine. Did you see them at the feast? Like something from the old songs. She'll be queen before the next moon, mark me. Arin listened without speaking. She kept her head down, veil tied tight, cloak heavy on her shoulders even in the midday heat. She worked longer hours now, tending the herb beds until her fingers cramped, healing small injuries in secret so no one would call her to the main halls. She avoided the eastern path entirely. She no longer ran because she no longer risked seeing him. But the pain found her anyway. It came in quiet moments, when she crushed rosemary between her fingers and the sharp green scent reminded her of riverbank picnics, when moonlight slanted through her cracked window and silvered the scars on her arms, when the silver bell in its cloth pouch chimed faintly if she moved too quickly. She told herself she should be relieved. He had stopped sending Thorn, stopped looking toward the quarter, stopped waiting. She told herself this was what she had wanted for him, for both of them. Yet every night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, feeling the hollow place where hope had once lived. Then came the confrontation. It happened on a bright afternoon when the sun stood high and merciless. Arin was in the lower herb garden behind the kitchens, kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds from the chamomile bed. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, careless for once, because she thought herself alone. Silver scars caught the light like threads of mercury. Footsteps approached, crisp, deliberate. Arin looked up. Seraphine stood at the garden gate, alone. No attendants, no guards, just her in a simple green gown that made her eyes look storm-colored. "Leave us," Seraphine said to the two kitchen girls who had paused to stare. They scurried away. Arin rose slowly, brushing soil from her hands. She pulled her sleeves down, but not before Seraphine saw. The other woman's gaze flicked to the scars, quick, assessing, then away. "You are persistent in your hiding," Seraphine said, voice calm, almost kind. "But you cannot hide forever." Arin said nothing. Seraphine stepped through the gate. "He has moved on. You see that, don't you? He walks with me now. He smiles for me now. The court speaks of weddings, of heirs, of a future that does not include shadows and cloaks." Arin's throat tightened. She forced her voice steady. "Then be glad. You have what you wanted." Seraphine's composure cracked. Just a hairline fracture. "What I wanted was never a contest. It was simply truth. You had your chance, Arin. Years of chances. You ran. Every time. You hid. You refused him. Do not pretend to grieve now that he has chosen clarity over memory." Arin lifted her chin. Beneath the veil her eyes burned. "I never pretended anything. I stayed away because I had to. Not because I wanted to." Seraphine laughed. Short, sharp. "Had to? You are a healer. A gifted one. Yet you choose to rot here in the dirt rather than stand where you once promised to stand. You are a coward who claims to heal others but can't even heal herself." The word landed like a slap. Arin's hands clenched at her sides. "You know nothing of what I carry. I know enough. I know scars when I see them. I know fear when it wears a veil." Seraphine stepped closer. "He deserves better than a girl who cannot even look him in the eye. He deserves someone who will stand beside him, not run from him. Or worse, caused him embarrassment." Arin met her gaze through the thin fabric. "Then give him that." For a moment something flickered in Seraphine's face. Pity, perhaps, or triumph. Then it hardened. "Stay away from him," she said quietly. "Stay away from the palace paths, from the gardens, from anywhere he might see you. If you truly care for him, you will disappear completely." She turned to leave. Arin spoke before she could stop herself. "And if he ever asks for me?" Seraphine paused at the gate. Without turning she said, "He won't." Then she was gone. Arin stood alone among the chamomile, the scent rising thick and sweet around her. She sank back to her knees. Her fingers dug into the earth. Tears came then, hot, silent, soaking into the veil and the soil beneath. She did not sob aloud. She never did. But the ground drank her grief like rain. And somewhere in the palace, a king walked beside a woman who glowed with borrowed light, feeling, for the first time in years, almost content. Almost. Chapter 6. The palace had never felt so alive with rumor and quiet celebration. Every corridor carried the same soft current. The king had chosen. Not in words yet, not a public declaration, but in glances held too long, in hands that brushed during council, in the way Seraphine now walked the halls with her chin lifted just a fraction higher, as though the crown already rested invisible on her brow. Servants bowed deeper when she passed. Guards straightened. Even the oldest courtiers, who had seen 3 reigns come and go, began to speak of wedding dates in careful, hopeful tones. Kaelion felt the change in his bones. The wolf inside him no longer paced at night. It lay quiet, sated, as though it had finally found the scent it had been hunting since puphood. When Seraphine entered a room, his gaze followed her without effort. When she spoke, he listened without the old restlessness tugging at the edges of his thoughts. The ache that had lived in his chest for 14 years, the one shaped like river reeds and a dimpled smile, had dulled to something almost bearable, almost gone. He told himself this was right. This was growing up. Seraphine felt it too, and the taste of victory was sweeter than any wine served at the moon feast. She no longer needed the mirror every night. A quick glance sufficed, enough to see the faint glow still clinging to her skin, enough to hear the whisper confirm. "He sees only you." She slept better now. She smiled more freely. She began to plan. But victory, she discovered, had sharp edges. Every time she walked past the eastern gardens or caught a glimpse of gray cloak disappearing around a corner, the old thorn twisted anew. Arin was still there, still breathing the same air, still existing in the margins of Kaelion's world like an unfinished sentence. Seraphine could not allow unfinished things. She waited for the right moment. It came on a crisp morning when frost still silvered the grass and the council had adjourned early. Kaelion sat alone in the smaller throne room, the one used for private audiences, reviewing maps of the western border. Seraphine entered without knocking, gown the color of fresh snow, expression composed but eyes bright with purpose. She closed the doors behind her. Kaelion looked up. Seraphine, she approached the dais slowly. I would speak with you on a matter of discipline. He set the map aside. Speak. There is a slave in the quarter who has shown repeated disrespect, refusal of summons, avoidance of duty, words spoken out of turn. She paused, letting the accusations settle like frost. She undermines order. She undermines respect for the crown. Kaelion's brow furrowed faintly. Who? Arin. The name hung between them. For the briefest instant something flickered in his eyes. Memory, perhaps, or the ghost of an old ache. Then it smoothed away, covered by the warm haze the enchantment still spun. She has always been difficult, he said quietly. Difficult is one word. Seraphine stepped onto the lowest step of the dais. Insolent is another. I have borne it long enough. I ask your leave to deal with her as I see fit. A reminder, public, so others understand that no one is above consequence. Not even those who once played at friendship with a king. Kaelion studied her. The wolf inside him stirred, not in protest, but in faint curiosity. The enchantment held firm, warm and golden, but beneath it something ancient sniffed the air. He nodded once. Do as you will. Seraphine's heart leapt. She curtsied low. Thank you, my king. She left the room with measured steps. By midday the command had spread like fire through dry grass. Arin was to be brought to the great hall at dusk. All who wished could witness. The king had given leave. Lady Seraphine would administer justice. In the slaves' quarters the air turned thick with fear and whispers. Arin heard the summons from a laundress who could barely meet her eyes. They say, it's for disrespect. To the crown. Arin stood motionless beside her cot, hands folded inside her sleeves. She had known this day would come eventually. She had simply hoped it would not come like this. When the guards arrived, two young men who looked almost apologetic, she went without protest. She kept the cloak wrapped tight, veil secure. She walked between them through the corridors she had avoided for years, head high even as her pulse thundered in her ears. The great hall was already filling when she entered. Torches burned along the walls. Benches had been pulled back to create an open circle before the dais. Nobles stood in clusters, murmuring. Servants lined the edges, eyes wide. Seraphine waited at the center, radiant in white and silver, hands folded calmly before her. Kaelion sat on the throne above them all. His gaze found Arin the moment she stepped into the light. For one heartbeat the enchantment wavered, like candle flame caught in a sudden draft. His wolf lifted its head sharply, nostrils flaring. Something raw and instinctive clawed at the edges of the golden haze. Then Seraphine moved forward, and the warmth returned, soothing, insistent. Arin was brought to stand before the dais. Silence fell. Seraphine spoke, voice clear and carrying. Arin, daughter of the herb gardens, you stand accused of repeated insolence, refusal of royal summons, and conduct unbecoming one who serves this house. The king has granted me authority to punish as I deem just. Arin said nothing. She kept her eyes on the floor. Seraphine stepped closer. Remove your cloak. A ripple went through the hall. She didn't fight it. She didn't protest like she was already waiting for this day. I have nothing to be ashamed of nor anyone to hide my shame from anymore. Arin told herself. Arin's hands rose slowly. She clutched the edges of the heavy fabric as though it were skin. Seraphine smiled. Small, cold, triumphant. Do it, or the guards will do it for you. Arin's fingers trembled. She looked up then, not at Seraphine but past her, to the throne, to Kaelion. Their eyes met, and in that instant the enchantment cracked. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Kaelion's breath caught. His wolf roared inside him. Not in anger, but in recognition, in pain, in fury at the chains that held it. Something in his chest snapped like dry wood. Stop, he said. The word came out low, rough. The hall froze. Seraphine turned, eyes wide. My king. Kaelion rose slowly. His hands gripped the armrests until the carved wolves creaked. I said stop. Seraphine paled. But you gave me leave. I revoke it. The words were quiet, final. Arin stood motionless, cloak still clutched to her chest, veil shadowing everything but her eyes. Eyes that shimmered now with something between terror and fragile hope. Kaelion descended the steps. The court parted like water. He stopped before Arin, close enough that she could smell pine and iron and the faint wildness that always clung to him after a hunt. He looked at her. Not at the cloak, not at the veil, but at her. Why did you want to do what she commands? He said softly. Why can't you fight back? Arin's voice came out small, cracked. I never wanted you to see. I know. He lifted a hand, slow, careful, as though approaching something easily startled. He did not touch her. He simply waited. Seraphine watched, frozen, horror dawning. The enchantment, once warm, once perfect, now felt like ash in her mouth. She turned and fled the hall, white gown trailing behind her like a ghost. The doors slammed shut in her wake. Kaelion remained standing before Arin. The hall held its breath. He spoke again, so quietly only she could hear. Come with me, please. Arin hesitated. Then, slowly, trembling, she nodded once. He offered his arm. She did not take it, but she walked beside him out of the hall, cloak still wrapped tight, veil still in place. Behind them the court erupted into murmurs. Ahead of them the corridors stretched long and shadowed. And somewhere deep inside Kaelion, the wolf howled. Not in triumph, but in desperate relief. Because the scent, the true scent, had finally broken through. Chapter 7. Seraphine did not run through the corridors. She glided. Even in panic, even with her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept her steps measured, her chin high, her face composed for any servant or guard who might glance her way. But inside she was unraveling, thread by thread. The warmth of the enchantment had turned cold in an instant, replaced by something sharp and hollow, like swallowing glass. She reached her chambers, shut the door with both hands pressed flat against the wood, and leaned there until her breathing steadied enough to move. The room was dim, heavy drapes still drawn from the afternoon ritual. A single candle burned on the dressing table, flame steady and yellow, throwing long shadows across the silver-framed mirror that waited like an old friend who had never once lied to her. Until now. She crossed the floor in 3 strides, seized the black silk wrap, and tore it away. The mirror of Valerian stared back. Dark glass, silver edges tarnished almost black at the corners. She looked into it. For the first time, it did not show her fading. It showed something worse. It showed Arin standing in the great hall, veil still in place, cloak clutched like armor, and Kaelion looking at her. Not with pity, not with duty, but with something raw and alive. Something that had never once appeared in his eyes when he looked at Seraphine. The mirror whispered, voice thinner now, almost brittle. She is waking him. The bond pulls. The spell phrase. Seraphine's fingers dug into the table edge until her nails bent. No, she had tasted chosen. She had felt his hand in hers, felt the court's eyes turn to her with approval instead of pity. She would not give it back. What is the way out? She asked, voice low and shaking. The mirror's whisper sharpened, like a blade drawn slow across stone. Drain her glow until the mate bond within her is sucked dry. Use the deeper sections. Dominate first, then drain. Seraphine's breath hitched. She had read those pages in the grimoire. yellowed parchment marked with warnings in faded red ink. Section 50. Chains of will to freeze and command. Section 80. The leeching chant, to pull light and life and leave only husk. Her mother had used them once, long ago, to take beauty from a rival and wear it herself. Seraphine had watched from the doorway, small and silent, as the woman's skin had grayed and crumpled like old parchment while her mother's cheeks grew luminous. She had never asked questions. She had simply remembered. Now memory became necessity. She opened the grimoire with trembling hands. The pages smelled of old smoke and iron. She found the chants, traced the words with her finger until they felt familiar on her tongue. She lit 3 more black candles, placed them in a triangle around the mirror. She knelt before it, shift slipping off one shoulder, hair falling loose around her face. She began with section 50. The words came slow at first, halting, then smoother. The air in the room thickened. The candles flared high, flames turning blue at the edges. Shadows stretched and twisted on the walls like living things. The mirror rose, slowly, silently, until it hovered before her at eye level. Dark smoke curled from its frame, thin tendrils that smelled of burnt myrrh and lightning. She felt power coil in her chest, cold, heavy, intoxicating. She rose. She would go back to the hall. She would finish what she started. But not yet. First she needed to be sure. She moved through the palace like a ghost in white silk, mirror floating behind her, hidden in shadow. Guards bowed as she passed. They did not see the darkness trailing at her heels. She reached a small antechamber near the eastern wing. Unused, dust-sheeted furniture, a single high window letting in moonlight. She stopped there. She chanted again, section 50, deeper this time. The air froze. A single servant sweeping the corridor outside stiffened mid-motion. Broom raised. A guard at the far end locked in place, hand on sword hilt. She smiled small, satisfied. It worked. Now the harder part. She returned to her chambers to prepare. Meanwhile, in the king's private solar, a small room high in the tower, lined with books and maps and a single wide window overlooking the moonlit forest. Kaelion stood with his back to the door. Arin stood near the hearth, still cloaked, still veiled. Hands clasped so tightly her knuckles showed white beneath the gray fabric. Neither had spoken since they left the hall. The silence stretched long enough to hurt. Kaelion turned first. He looked at her, really looked, and the wolf inside him howled so loudly he almost winced. It was like something came on me and I could not remember anything from the past. But now I remember everything, he said quietly. Every afternoon by the river, every promise, every time you laughed and the dimple appeared, every time you ran after that and I pretended it didn't tear something out of me. Arin's shoulders trembled. He took one step closer, careful, slow. I thought, maybe you hated me, after my father died, after my mother. I thought grief had changed you, or that you finally saw me for what I was. A boy who would wear a crown and nothing else. She shook her head, small, fierce. Never. Then why? Her voice came out cracked, barely above a whisper. Because I changed. Not you. She lifted one hand, slow, hesitant, and drew back the veil just enough for moonlight to catch the serpent birthmark curling across her cheek. Then she pushed the hood back, let the cloak fall open at the front. Silver scars gleamed, dozens, hundreds, thin lines crossing her arms, her collarbones, the curve of her throat. A map of every life she had touched, every wound she had taken. Kaelion's breath left him in a sharp, pained sound. He stepped forward, close enough now that she could see the way his eyes shimmered. You hid this from me? I hid it from everyone, but especially from you. Tears slipped free, catching light like tiny stars. Queens are perfect, Kaelion. Flawless. I am, marked, used. Every scar is someone else's pain I carried so they wouldn't have to. I couldn't stand beside you like this. I couldn't let you see what kindness cost me. He reached out, slow, so slow, and brushed one tear from her cheek with the pad of his thumb. His touch was warm, steady. I would have seen you, he said, voice rough. Not the scars. You. The girl who laughed at my terrible stone skipping. The girl who made flower crowns and called me king of the willows. The girl who promised to rule beside me even when we both knew it was impossible. She closed her eyes. I thought if you saw this, you would look away, like everyone else eventually does. He cupped her face, gentle, reverent. Look at me. She did. I am looking, he said. And I am not looking away. You think I would not have chosen you? His voice cracked. With every mark, every line, every story written on your skin. Was that why you ran all these years? Arin's eyes filled. She nodded once, small, trembling. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers. I choose you, he said. Scars and all. Always. A sob broke from her then. Small, choked. The sound she had held back for 14 years. He pulled her close. Not crushing, not demanding. Just holding. Her forehead against his chest. His arms around her shoulders, cloak and all. She did not pull away. For the first time in years, she let herself lean into someone else's strength. Outside the window, the moon watched. Cold, indifferent. Inside the tower room, two broken things began, slowly, to mend. But in another part of the palace, Seraphine finished her preparations. The mirror floated behind her like a dark moon of its own. She whispered the first words of Section 80. The air tasted of ash. And the draining began. Chapter 8. The great hall had emptied after the earlier confrontation. But the echoes lingered, whispers of shock. The scrape of benches pushed back. The soft slam of doors as courtiers retreated to speculate in safer rooms. Moonlight poured through the tall arched windows now, silver and cold, painting the marble floor in pale stripes. Torches had been left burning low. Their flames danced weakly, throwing long, restless shadows across the tapestries of ancient wolves and forgotten battles. Seraphine entered alone. The mirror of Valerian floated behind her. Silent, dark, its silver frame curling with thin threads of black smoke. She wore the same white gown from the moon feast, but it looked different now. Wrinkled at the hem, one sleeve torn where she had caught it on a doorframe in her haste. Her hair had come half loose. Strands clung to her damp cheeks. Her eyes were wide, fever-bright. The gray turned almost black with desperation. She stopped at the center of the hall. She raised both hands. The chant began. Section 51st, low and rhythmic, words that tasted of iron and frost on her tongue. The air locked. Every torch flame froze mid-flicker. The smoke from the braziers hung motionless. Outside the windows, even the wind stilled. Anyone still in the corridors? Guards, servants, late-night wanderers. Stiffened where they stood, statues caught in mid-breath. Only Seraphine moved. She turned toward the throne room doors. They opened without touch. Kaelion and Arin stood just inside the threshold. They had come here seeking quiet, to speak further, to let the fragile new understanding between them breathe in a place without eyes. Now they stood frozen too, bodies rigid, eyes wide but unblinking. Kaelion's arm was half raised, as though he had been reaching to steady Arin. Her cloak hung open. The veil had slipped back enough to reveal the serpent birthmark and the silver constellations of scars across her throat and collarbones. Seraphine stepped forward. Her voice cracked when she spoke, but the words carried. You two want to end up together? She laughed short, broken, more sob than sound. Let me tell you how this ends. She lifted one hand toward Arin. Dark smoke lashed from her fingers. Thin whips of shadow that wrapped around the cloak and veil. Fabric tore with a soft, ripping sound. The cloak fell away in shreds. The veil fluttered to the floor like a dying moth. Arin stood exposed. Moonlight caught every silver scar. Hundreds of them, crossing her arms, her shoulders, her ribs, her back where the shift had slipped low. They shimmered, not ugly, but luminous. Proof of every life she had saved. Every wound she had taken so another would not bear it. Seraphine's eyes filled. Not beauty, she whispered. Not even close. She began the second chant, Section 80. The draining began. Light, soft, golden, steady. Started to pull from Arin's skin. It rose in thin threads, drawn toward Seraphine's open palms. Arin's shoulders sagged. Her knees buckled. She would have fallen if the freezing spell had not held her upright. Kaelion's wolf roared inside him. The enchantment, golden, warm, false, shattered like thin ice under a hammer. Chains of ancient magic that had bound him to the throne earlier snapped. He staggered forward one step, then another, fighting the paralysis with raw will. His eyes blazed amber, pupils blown wide. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Not human, not entirely wolf. Pure instinct protecting what was his. Seraphine chanted louder, frantic. The light flowed faster. But something was wrong. The scars on Arin's body were not fading into nothing. They were glowing brighter, silver turning to white fire. The birthmark on her cheek pulsed like a living thing. The light Seraphine pulled was not beauty. It was sacrifice. It was kindness made visible. It was truth. And truth does not drain easily. Seraphine's hands began to tremble. The mirror behind her cracked. Once sharp, like breaking bone. She screamed at it. Take her. Take it all. Like my mother did. Like we always did. The mirror's whisper came back thin, almost pitying. The same way it sucks beauty, it transfers blemishes. Seraphine's eyes widened in horror. The light reversed. Silver scars, every one Arin had ever earned, began to lift from her skin. They floated, shimmering, then arrowed toward Seraphine. Not as punishment, as return, as balance. The first scar touched Seraphine's wrist, a thin silver line. Then another, and another. She screamed. The mirror cracked wider. Arin, still held by the spell, lifted her head slowly. No fear in her eyes. No anger. Only quiet, unbreakable light. She stepped forward one trembling step against the freezing magic. The mirror shattered. Glass exploded outward in a shower of glittering dust. The smoke dissolved. The candles guttered and died. The freezing spell broke. Everyone in the corridors gasped back to life. Kaelion roared. Full-throated, protective, triumphant, and caught Arin as her knees finally gave. He lowered her gently to the marble floor, cradling her against his chest. Her scars still shimmered, but softer now, fewer, paler, as though the mirror had taken only what was excess, only what had been forced upon her by old cruelty. Seraphine fell to her knees. Her beauty faded like smoke, cheeks hollowing, skin dulling, hair losing its luster. The silver scars bloomed across her arms, her throat, her face. Not ugly, but honest. Proof of everything she had tried to steal. She looked small, human, broken. What have I done? She whispered. Arin, still in Kaelion's arms, lifted her head. Her voice was soft, hoarse, but steady. You tried to steal what was never meant to be taken. Seraphine stared at her, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Kaelion looked down at Arin. His hand cupped her scarred cheek, gentle, reverent. She reached up, slow, hesitant, and touched his face. A sob broke from her then. Quiet at first, then deeper. The sound of 14 years of silence finally released. He held her tighter. Around them the hall slowly filled again. Guards, servants, courtiers drawn by the crash and the roar. They stood silent, watching. Seraphine rose unsteadily. No one moved to stop her. She walked past them, head bowed, scars gleaming in the moonlight. Out of the hall, out of the palace, toward the northern mountains where no mirrors waited and no one would ever call her beautiful again. In the days that followed, Lysara changed. Not all at once. Not with proclamations or decrees. But slowly. Beauty was no longer measured by flawless skin or perfect features. It was measured by courage, by sacrifice, by truth carried quietly, even when it hurt. Kaelion did not rush into marriage. He waited again, but this time with Arin beside him. They walked the eastern path together every evening. She no longer ran. She no longer hid. When moonlight touched her skin, the remaining scars shimmered like stars. Fewer now, but brighter. A reminder. Real beauty does not fade. It endures. And in the quiet moments, when the palace slept and only the river sang in the distance. They remembered children's promises under willow trees. They laughed. They cried. They healed. Together. The END. This story took days for me to put together like this. I need encouragement to keep moving, so please don't leave without subscribing and clicking the like button.